In September 2004, in Mumbai, India, a wedding took place that no one would ever forget. Two prestigious families, Samira Chawhan and Devan Basin, were united in a lavish ceremony that seemed to mark the beginning of a perfect marriage. But just hours later, that same wedding night would spiral into a shocking tragedy. The groom, Devan Basin, was found dead in the honeymoon suite, blood spilled across the floor, multiple fatal wounds to his body. A night that was supposed to be filled with love and joy ended in horror, and no one could have predicted how this story would unfold. Samira Chawhan's life began in a world of opulence. Born into one of Mumbai's wealthiest families, she had every luxury at her fingertips. Her father, a shrewd and successful businessman in the import-export industry, ensured that his daughter lacked for nothing. Samira grew up in sprawling estates, with rooms filled with expensive art, imported furniture, and closets full of designer clothes. Her childhood was punctuated by private jet flights to international destinations, extravagant vacations at five-star resorts, and parties where the crème de la crème of Mumbai's high society rubbed elbows. Her family's wealth provided her with opportunities that most could only dream of, but Samira was not satisfied with merely enjoying the privileges that came with it. She was an ambitious young woman, not content to be just another pretty face in a sea of luxury. From a young age, she understood the power of influence. While many girls her age were preoccupied with social media and school dances, Samira focused on something far more important: control. Her intelligence and ambition were evident even in her youth. She excelled at every academic level, not just for her grades, but for the sharpness of her mind and the clarity of her vision. She attended one of the best universities in Mumbai, where she quickly became known for her ability to navigate the world of business and politics. But she wasn't just an academic prodigy. Samira was a social chameleon. She knew how to work a room, how to make connections, and, most importantly, how to use her charm to get what she wanted. It wasn't long before Samira became a fixture in Mumbai's elite circles. She was invited to the most exclusive parties, galas, and charity events. She became a regular at luxury hotel openings and high-end fundraisers. While many of her peers were caught up in the world of fashion and fun, Samira's gaze was fixed firmly on something greater: power. Power didn't just come from wealth, it came from the right relationships, the right alliances. Samira began to cultivate relationships with Mumbai's most influential men and women, maneuvering her way through a web of social networks that promised access to the highest echelons of power. She was no longer just a woman with wealth, she was a woman who understood how to leverage that wealth for influence, to gain access to people who could help her achieve her ultimate goal: control. But Samira's ambition wasn't driven by a desire for fame or recognition. She was after something far more significant: a life of stability, a life that would guarantee her place at the top of Mumbai's social and financial hierarchies. She wanted to be a power broker in her own right. It was at one of these extravagant events that Samira met Devan Basin. He wasn't the typical rich playboy that she was used to seeing at such gatherings. Devan was not born into wealth like many of the other men in the room. He came from a middle-class family, his parents working tirelessly to make ends meet, his upbringing far more modest than Samira's. But Devan had something far more valuable than inherited wealth: he had drive. Devan was a self-made man, someone who had worked his way up in the financial world. By the age of 26, he had accumulated a considerable fortune, investing wisely, building a successful career in one of the most competitive industries in India. Yet despite his financial success, Devan was not someone who was easily swayed by the glamour and glitz of the high society lifestyle. He wasn't looking for a pretty face or a trophy wife. But Samira was different. She wasn't just a pretty face, she was a force to be reckoned with. When Devan first encountered her at an elite event, he was taken by her beauty, but it was her intelligence, her wit, and her magnetic personality that truly drew him in. Samira exuded a sense of confidence and charisma that was hard to ignore. Unlike most women he had met, Samira didn't try to impress him with superficial charm. Instead, she engaged him in deep conversation, challenging him intellectually. They talked about everything: business, life, philosophy, and their visions for the future. Samira's ability to hold her own in a conversation, her sharp mind, and her knowledge of the world around her fascinated Devan. He found her compelling not just for her beauty but for her intellect and ambition. Samira, in turn, saw something in Devan that no one else seemed to. He wasn't the arrogant heir to a fortune or the entitled son of a business magnate. He was a man of principle, someone who had built his wealth through hard work, who valued honesty and integrity. He represented a stability that Samira craved. In Devan, Samira saw an opportunity, a man who could not only elevate her financially but could provide her with the kind of secure, stable future she had always sought. He had the kind of power she admired, the kind of success she aspired to. But unlike the other men she had known, Devan wasn't looking to be dazzled. He wasn't the kind of man who could be easily manipulated. And that intrigued her. Devan soon found himself falling for Samira. He admired her beauty, of course, but it was her intelligence, her drive, and her independence that truly captivated him. In her, he saw someone who could build a life with him, someone who could share in his dreams, his ambitions, and his goals. Samira, in his eyes, was the perfect woman, a partner who could support him, challenge him, and build a future together. To Samira, Devan was the perfect match, a man who had the wealth, the status, and the ambition to help her secure her place at the top. But she wasn't in love with him in the traditional sense. For Samira, love was a tool, an asset, and Devan was a means to an end. She had learned from an early age that relationships were built on what you could get from them. She didn't need to love Devan to marry him, she needed him to marry her. Devan, blinded by his affection for Samira, never suspected her true motivations. He believed that Samira was everything he had been searching for, a beautiful, intelligent woman who would stand by him and share his dreams. For Devan, the wedding was the culmination of a fairy tale romance, a bond forged on love and mutual respect. But for Samira, the wedding was simply a business transaction. She would marry Devan not out of love, but out of necessity. She needed him to solidify her place in the world of power and wealth, to ensure that her future was secure. She saw Devan not as the love of her life, but as a stepping stone, someone to help her climb even higher. As the wedding day drew near, Samira played her role flawlessly. She was the perfect bride, lovely, composed, and the picture of elegance. She knew how to charm Devan's family and friends, how to be the loving fiancé who had found her perfect match. But behind the scenes, Samira was preparing for the next chapter in her carefully orchestrated life, one in which Devan would play his part, just as she had planned. Devan, for his part, was caught up in the excitement of the wedding. He could not imagine that the woman he had given his heart to could be anything other than sincere. He was convinced that their future together would be filled with happiness, stability, and love. Samira, in his eyes, was everything he had ever wanted. As the wedding ceremony unfolded, Samira's thoughts were not of love or dreams of a shared future with Devan. Instead, she was already looking ahead to what this marriage could bring her: wealth, influence, and a future where she could continue to climb the social ladder. Little did Devan know, the woman he had just promised his life to was already plotting how to secure her own future, even at his expense. While Devan was busy preparing for the wedding of his dreams, he remained blissfully unaware that there was another man lurking in the shadows of his life, his closest friend, Ishan Meta. Ishan wasn't just any friend, he was the kind of man that everyone admired, charismatic, confident, and effortlessly successful. Like Devan, Ishan had climbed his way to the top, but unlike Devan, he was a man who thrived on power, competition, and the thrill of taking risks. He lived a life where boundaries were often pushed and moral lines blurred. Ishan had known Samira for some time, but as the wedding approached, their relationship began to take on a different form. Samira, who had already carefully positioned herself in the social scene, knew exactly how to manipulate every situation to her advantage. Though she had no deep affection for Devan, she respected the connections he offered and the stability he could provide. Still, the growing tension between her and Ishan was palpable. Ishan, with his magnetic presence and free-spirited attitude, was the opposite of Devan. Where Devan was steady and dependable, Ishan was unpredictable and daring. Samira couldn't deny the allure of his excitement, his spontaneity, and the dangerous edge he brought into her life. As Devan busied himself with wedding details, Samira found herself drawn more and more to Ishan. They often found themselves alone at parties, their casual conversations turning into long, lingering stares. It started innocently enough, a brush of the hand here, a fleeting moment of shared laughter there, but the more time they spent together, the more they began to cross unspoken lines. The chemistry between them was undeniable, and both of them felt the magnetic pull. There was something intoxicating about their connection, a sense of risk, of temptation, that neither could resist. Samira had always prided herself on control, but in Ishan's presence, she felt a vulnerability, a yearning she hadn't known before. It wasn't love, it was something darker. Ishan didn't see her as a conquest but as something forbidden, and the allure of that forbiddenness made everything feel more exhilarating. One evening, when Devan was away at a pre-wedding party, Samira and Ishan found themselves alone. The atmosphere was charged with tension, both knowing that their actions were crossing a line they could never uncross. But in the heat of the moment, reason seemed distant. It was a moment of surrender, of giving in to temptation without thinking of the consequences. Their bodies moved closer, and before either of them could stop it, the affair had begun. In that moment, Samira felt a sense of freedom that she hadn't felt in years. With Ishan, there were no expectations, no obligations, just raw passion. She didn't love him, but there was something about the forbidden nature of their relationship that thrilled her. Ishan was everything Devan was not: reckless, unpredictable, and driven by desire. It was a contrast that was impossible for her to ignore, and it made the affair all the more intoxicating. Each stolen kiss, each secret rendezvous, only served to heighten the thrill of their secret bond. Ishan, for his part, was equally captivated. He loved the idea of having Samira, especially knowing that she was about to marry his best friend. There was a rush in the idea of taking something so precious from someone so close to him. It wasn't just about Samira, though she was undeniably beautiful and enticing. It was about the power he felt from conquering something that wasn't meant to be his. Devan was his best friend, but the challenge of taking Samira away from him was a temptation Ishan couldn't resist. The affair, though reckless and dangerous, was thrilling for both of them. It wasn't love, but it was certainly a powerful attraction that neither could deny. The secrecy, the risk of being caught, the betrayal of Devan, it all added an element of danger that was impossible to ignore. As the days leading up to the wedding grew shorter, Samira found herself torn. On the one hand, she still needed Devan. He was her ticket to a life of control, wealth, and social power. But on the other hand, Ishan was everything Devan was not: exciting, unpredictable, and dangerously attractive. The affair had become more than just a physical relationship, it was a game of power, one that Samira had no intention of losing. She knew that the affair with Ishan was wrong, that it would destroy the man who trusted her most, but the thrill of it kept her coming back. The moments they shared felt like a rebellion against the life she had carefully crafted, a life where everything was about appearances, control, and calculated moves. With Ishan, there were no rules, no restrictions. She was free to explore a side of herself she had long suppressed. It was a seductive feeling, and it only made her desire him more. Despite the growing guilt that tugged at her conscience, Samira couldn't help but feel more and more drawn to Ishan. He made her feel alive in ways that Devan never could. Ishan represented freedom, while Devan represented security. And as the wedding day loomed closer, Samira found herself questioning whether she could truly go through with marrying Devan, knowing the way her heart and body betrayed her when she was with Ishan. Meanwhile, Ishan reveled in the power he had over Samira. He knew she was married to Devan, that she was supposed to be loyal, but he relished the idea of being the man who had stolen her affections. There was a twisted satisfaction in knowing that Devan was about to pledge his life to a woman who was already his. Ishan didn't feel guilty, he saw it as a conquest, one that made him feel invincible. But as the wedding neared, both Samira and Ishan understood that their affair could not continue forever. The secret was becoming harder to hide. The tension between them grew unbearable, each stolen moment of passion adding to the growing weight of their betrayal. They both knew that there would come a point when the lies would unravel, and the truth would have to be faced. But for now, they allowed themselves to remain in the haze of temptation and excitement, unwilling to confront the inevitable consequences. In the days before the wedding, both Samira and Ishan continued their affair, even as the wedding plans reached their final stages. Devan was oblivious to the affair, too caught up in the excitement of marrying the woman he had always dreamed of. He trusted Ishan implicitly, seeing him as his closest friend, but he had no idea that his best friend was sharing secret moments with his fiancée. Samira knew that she was playing a dangerous game, one that could cost her everything if it was ever discovered. But for the first time in years, she felt like she was in control of something: her desires, her choices, her future. She knew that marrying Devan would give her the life she wanted, but her affair with Ishan made her feel powerful in a way that nothing else could. It was a precarious balance. On one hand, Samira had Devan, her ticket to security and status. On the other hand, Ishan offered her a taste of excitement and forbidden pleasure. But in the back of her mind, Samira knew that one of these men would have to go, and she couldn't afford to lose Devan. Yet, she also couldn't deny the magnetic pull she felt toward Ishan. As the night of the wedding approached, the tension between the three of them reached a boiling point. The love, the betrayal, the secrets, they were all about to collide in a way no one could have predicted. And as Samira prepared to walk down the aisle to marry Devan, she couldn't shake the feeling that the choices she had made were leading her down a dangerous path, one that could end in tragedy. September 2004. The day had arrived. The grand celebration of Devan and Samira's marriage had captivated Mumbai, drawing attention from high society, media, and everyone in between. Their wedding, held at a lavish five-star hotel, was a spectacle of grandeur, an affair that seemed to epitomize all the things that Samira and Devan had worked for: wealth, prestige, and influence. Everything had been meticulously planned, from the opulent decorations to the well-curated guest list. The venue sparkled under the dazzling lights, and the ceremony itself was flawless, with guests showering the couple with admiration. Devan, a man of principles, stood at the altar, his eyes full of love as he gazed at his bride, Samira. To him, this day marked the beginning of a perfect life, a life where he could build a future with the woman he believed was his soulmate. For Samira, the wedding was not just a symbol of love, it was a carefully calculated step toward greater power. But on that night, as the clock struck midnight and the festivities began to wind down, the glamour of the event would quickly give way to a much darker reality. As the last guests departed the wedding reception, Devan and Samira retired to their honeymoon suite, eager to start their life as husband and wife. Devan, full of excitement and hope, enveloped Samira in a warm embrace, his heart brimming with love. He whispered sweet words into her ear, imagining a future of happiness, children, and success together. The love he felt was genuine, a connection he thought could weather anything. But Samira, despite her outward composure, was far from ready to begin this new chapter with Devan. Her mind was elsewhere, far from the future they had just promised each other. She had no excitement in her heart for what lay ahead. Her thoughts, instead, were consumed with Ishan. The affair that had started as a dangerous game was now an obsession, a passion she couldn't easily walk away from. Her heart wasn't with Devan, it was still entangled with the thrill of Ishan's presence, a man she had been drawn to since their first meeting. As Devan spoke to her, his words of love falling softly in her ear, Samira's eyes glazed over, a distant look clouding her gaze. She nodded along, smiling, but her thoughts were far from the wedding vows they had just exchanged. Devan, blind in his devotion, didn't notice the emptiness behind her smile. He believed everything was perfect. But for Samira, nothing about that night felt right. When Devan excused himself to handle a small matter at the front desk, nothing more than a quick errand she assumed would take no more than 20 minutes, Samira saw her opportunity. Her pulse quickened with anticipation as she excused herself from the suite and slipped out into the hallway. The sound of her heels echoed in the empty corridor as she moved swiftly toward Ishan's room. Samira's heart pounded as she reached Ishan's door. This was the moment she had been waiting for, her secret rendezvous with him, the man who had become the forbidden temptation she couldn't resist. The affair was reckless, dangerous, and filled with the kind of passion that both exhilarated and consumed her. Samira had always been in control of everything in her life, but with Ishan, control was a fleeting illusion. She knocked softly on the door, and without a second's hesitation, Ishan opened it. His eyes widened when he saw her standing there, but only for a moment. Without a word, he pulled her inside, his arms encircling her, as if they had been waiting for this moment all night. Samira melted into his embrace, the outside world slipping away as they gave in to the undeniable pull between them. They were lost in the moment, the excitement of the affair fueling their desire. In those few minutes, nothing else mattered, neither the wedding they had just attended, nor the life that Samira was supposed to be starting with Devan. The affair was an escape, a way to defy the life she had been forced into, to experience the kind of freedom and excitement she craved. In Ishan's arms, she was no longer the woman bound by societal expectations. She was something else entirely, wild, free, and completely out of control. Meanwhile, back in the honeymoon suite, Devan's heart began to sink. Samira had been gone longer than he expected. His mind raced with thoughts. Was she okay? Had something happened to her? Was she upset? His stomach twisted as he replayed their conversation, wondering if something had been off, though he couldn't put his finger on it. He was just a little worried, nothing more. But as the minutes ticked by, Devan's unease grew. He had left her alone only to take care of a minor task, but when he returned, the room was empty. The bathroom door was open, but Samira was nowhere to be found. His first instinct was to call out for her, but when there was no answer, his anxiety deepened. He waited for a moment, pacing in the quiet room, unsure what to do. Confused and growing more anxious, Devan stepped into the hallway, hoping to find her. Maybe she had stepped out to get something from the lobby, or maybe just needed some air. But as he walked down the corridor, something caught his eye, a small detail that sent a chill down his spine. Ishan's door was slightly ajar. Devan froze for a moment, his heart racing. It was odd for Ishan to have left his door open at this hour, especially with everything going on. But still, he didn't want to jump to conclusions. A surge of unease washed over him, but he pushed it aside, telling himself it was just his imagination running wild. But as he approached the door, something inside him snapped, and he couldn't resist. He pushed the door open just a little more. What he saw next would haunt him for the rest of his life. Devan's eyes widened as he looked inside the room. What he saw left him speechless. There, in the middle of the room, were Samira and Ishan, his wife and his best friend, locked in an intimate embrace, kissing passionately on the bed. The scene before him was unreal, like something out of a nightmare. The woman he had just married, the woman he had pledged his life to, was now in the arms of his closest friend, the man he trusted most. Time seemed to freeze for a moment. Devan stood there, paralyzed, the weight of betrayal crashing down on him with the force of a freight train. His mind couldn't comprehend what was happening. How could this be real? How could Samira, the woman he thought he knew, do this to him? And how could Ishan, the man he had called his best friend, betray him in the most cruel and unforgivable way? Anger, disbelief, and devastation collided inside him, and in that moment, Devan was consumed by a wave of emotion he could neither control nor understand. The future he had envisioned, the life he thought they would build together, crumbled before him in the span of a few seconds. The pain was unbearable. Samira, hearing the door creak open, looked up with a start. Her face drained of color as she locked eyes with Devan. There was no hiding what had just happened. No words could explain it, no excuses could make it right. The man she had just married stood there, witnessing the destruction of everything he thought they had. Devan stood frozen, unable to tear his gaze away from the two of them. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with tension. It was as if time had stopped, and in that stillness, Devan could only focus on the crushing weight of betrayal that pressed down on him. Samira's face was a mixture of shock and guilt, but it was clear she knew there was no going back from this moment. She had been caught. Ishan, on the other hand, sat up slowly, his expression unreadable, as if this scene, this moment of exposure, was something he had expected, even anticipated. The power dynamics were shifting rapidly. What had started as a dangerous game of desire had now turned into a deadly standoff. Devan's heart beat wildly in his chest as the realization of what he was witnessing began to sink in. The woman he loved, the woman he had married, had betrayed him. And the man who had been his best friend, the one person he trusted above all others, had not only taken something that belonged to him but had done so with calculated precision. Devan's rage exploded like a dam breaking, flooding the room with anger and disbelief. His body tensed as he saw red his love, his trust, everything he believed in shattered in an instant. Without warning, he lunged at Ishan, his fists flying in a frenzy of fury. He grabbed Ishan by the collar, pulling him off the bed and sending them both crashing to the floor in a tangle of limbs. Each punch that Devan threw was a raw, primal reaction to the pain of betrayal. His knuckles collided with Ishan's face again and again, the sickening sound of flesh hitting flesh filling the room. Ishan, taken by surprise, staggered back, trying to shield himself from the onslaught. His mouth was split open, blood trickling down his chin as he tried to catch his breath, but Devan didn't care. Nothing mattered except the white-hot rage coursing through his veins. His mind was no longer functioning rationally, only the urge to hurt, to make Ishan feel the weight of his betrayal. Samira stood frozen, her heart racing as she screamed for Devan to stop. But her voice was drowned out by the sounds of punches landing and the violent chaos that had overtaken the room. "Devan, stop. You're going to kill him," she cried, but her words barely made an impact. The man she had once loved, the man she had married just hours ago, was a stranger now, a monster consumed by fury. Devan was lost to the rage, his fists still flying. But as Samira watched helplessly, her mind began to race. She knew something had to be done. She couldn't let Devan destroy everything. She couldn't let him destroy Ishan, the man who had come to mean so much to her. With trembling hands, she glanced around the room, desperate for a solution. Her eyes darted across the room, desperate for something to stop the madness. And then, on the table beside the bed, she saw it. The crystal vase, gleaming in the dim light. It was the kind of vase that had cost a small fortune, an extravagant piece that had been a part of the wedding decor. In that moment, it became something more, a weapon. Without thinking, Samira grabbed it, her fingers wrapping around its smooth surface. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears as she lifted the heavy vase above her head. Without a moment's hesitation, Samira swung the vase down with all her strength, smashing it over Devan's head. The collision was deafening. The sound of glass shattering was followed by the sickening thud of the vase cracking against his skull. For a brief moment, time seemed to stop. Devan staggered, his body swaying, his hand flying to his head in an instinctive attempt to stop the bleeding. But it was too much. The force of the blow sent him crashing to the floor, his body crumpling in a heap. Blood pooled around him, spreading out across the plush carpet like an ominous warning. His breath came in ragged gasps as his consciousness faded. Samira's heart skipped a beat as she looked down at him, her breath catching in her throat. Had she killed him? Was he dead? A few moments passed in stunned silence. Samira stood over Devan, staring at his crumpled form on the floor, the blood slowly seeping out of him. Her chest tightened, and she could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The adrenaline that had pushed her to act without thinking now gave way to cold, paralyzing panic. Ishan, who had been dazed by Devan's attack and the chaos that followed, finally snapped out of his own stupor. He looked over at Samira, his eyes wide with shock. He could see the panic on her face, and the horror that mirrored his own. Neither of them had meant for it to go this far. This was supposed to be a way to escape the consequences, not a murder. "What do we do now?" Ishan asked, his voice low and filled with terror. Samira was breathing too fast, her mind racing, but she quickly snapped into action. There was no time to waste. They couldn't let Devan's death be discovered. They had to cover their tracks, make it look like something else, something more believable. Without hesitation, Samira began to give orders. "We need to stage a robbery," she said, her voice trembling but decisive. "We'll make it look like an intruder broke in, attacked Devan, and left him for dead." Her mind was spinning as she started to rearrange the room, moving furniture and tossing items around to create the illusion of a break-in. She pulled a drawer out of the nightstand, scattering its contents across the floor, as if a burglar had rifled through it in search of valuables. Ishan, still in shock, followed her lead. He moved to the window, unlocking it and leaving it slightly ajar, making it appear as if someone had snuck in from the outside. Samira wiped away the blood around Devan's head, trying to minimize the evidence that could give them away. They had to act fast before anyone noticed anything was wrong. As Samira and Ishan worked in a frantic, almost robotic frenzy, Samira's mind raced with the implications of what they had just done. She had never intended for things to get this far. She had never planned for Devan's death. But now, there was no turning back. If anyone found out what had truly happened, they were both doomed. With trembling hands, Samira grabbed the hotel phone and dialed the front desk. Her voice shook as she tried to sound frantic, as if she had just discovered the attack herself. "Hello. I need help. There's been an intruder. My husband, he's been attacked. I think he's unconscious. Please, send someone immediately." The words felt foreign coming from her mouth, and yet they came with an eerie ease. She didn't hesitate. She knew what she had to do to cover up the truth. The call ended, and Samira stood there for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. Ishan, watching her, gave a small nod of approval. "We've done everything we can," he said, his voice cold and matter-of-fact. Samira's eyes met his, and for a moment, she saw the same fear in his eyes that she felt inside herself. They had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The minutes ticked by slowly, the sound of the clock on the wall mocking their every movement. When the paramedics arrived, they found Devan lying unconscious on the floor, blood still pooling around him. His body was battered, but somehow still alive, though barely. The paramedics rushed to work, administering first aid and stabilizing him. They murmured to each other, trying to assess the severity of his injuries, while Samira hovered nearby, pretending to be a concerned wife. Her heart raced as they worked, wondering if Devan would survive long enough to speak the truth. If he did, everything would unravel. Devan's life hung in the balance. He was rushed to the hospital, still unconscious, as Samira and Ishan watched in silence. There was nothing they could do now but wait and hope that their plan would work. The police would arrive soon, asking questions. The investigation would begin. But Samira was determined to stick to the story, that Devan had been attacked by an intruder, a random act of violence in a hotel that was supposed to be a haven for their honeymoon. The storm that had begun with the wedding would soon erupt. The consequences of their actions were far from over. The truth was buried under layers of lies, but how long could they keep it hidden? How long could they cover up the murder they had committed? The night had started as a celebration of love, but now it was a nightmare, one that neither Samira nor Ishan could escape. And as the hours passed, they both knew deep down that their lives, as they had known them, were over. The investigation into Devan's death started with a sense of urgency. The police were called to the five-star hotel as soon as the paramedics arrived with Devan, who had been rushed to the hospital. His condition was critical, his survival uncertain, but the fact that he was still alive gave the police hope that they might uncover the truth before it was too late. The honeymoon suite, where the crime had occurred, was meticulously processed. The detectives examined every corner of the room, looking for clues, any sign of a struggle or forced entry. From the blood on the floor to the overturned furniture, everything seemed to fit the pattern of a botched robbery. Items had been scattered around the room, as though someone had ransacked the place in search of valuables. The shattered glass from the vase on the floor seemed to confirm the story that Samira had given, that a thief had broken in, attacked her husband, and left. But the more the detectives looked, the more inconsistencies began to surface. The most glaring of these was the lack of any signs of forced entry. The door to the suite had been locked from the inside, and there were no broken windows or evidence of anyone sneaking in. How could a thief have gotten in without leaving a trace? And then there was the question of the fingerprints. There were no prints in the room except for Samira's and Ishan's. The detective's gut told him something wasn't right. He had seen too many similar cases of staged robberies, and this one felt wrong. He began to focus on the people closest to the victim, starting with Samira and Ishan. The breakthrough came when the hotel's security footage was reviewed. The hotel had cameras installed throughout the building, including in the hallways near the honeymoon suites. As the investigators pored over the footage, they found a crucial piece of evidence. Samira had left her honeymoon suite, dressed in the same attire she had worn during the wedding ceremony. The timestamp on the footage showed her walking down the hallway, pausing briefly outside Ishan's room. After a moment of hesitation, she knocked on the door, and Ishan opened it, letting her in. The footage was clear. Samira had not been alone in the room like she had claimed. The truth was undeniable. She had gone to Ishan's room in the midst of what should have been her honeymoon with her husband. The affair was exposed for all to see, but it didn't stop there. The footage also showed Samira leaving Ishan's room about an hour later, looking disheveled and anxious. This was the first crack in her alibi. The lie she had told about being alone in the suite was no longer believable. As the police continued to piece together the case, they turned to forensic analysis to confirm their suspicions. The forensic team examined the scene carefully and found several significant pieces of evidence. One of the most damning discoveries was the blood on Samira's dress. It wasn't just any blood, it was Devan's. The blood stains were not just from the scene of the crime, they were on Samira's clothing, specifically on the fabric of her dress. The blood had not been on her hands alone, and it was clear that she had been directly involved in the violent attack. Forensic experts confirmed that the blood had been transferred onto her dress before Devan was moved, further suggesting that Samira had been the one to strike him with the vase. The forensic evidence gave the police the final pieces they needed to confront Samira and Ishan. The mounting evidence couldn't be ignored. There was no way around it now. The next step in the investigation was to bring Samira and Ishan in for questioning. The detectives knew that Samira would be difficult to crack. She had the aura of someone who was used to being in control, someone who had spent her life manipulating others to get what she wanted. But the mounting evidence made it clear that they had her cornered. Ishan was brought in first. He sat nervously in the interrogation room, his fingers tapping on the table as his eyes darted around the room. The pressure of the situation was unbearable. He had never imagined that things would go this far, that a simple affair would end in murder. The detectives didn't waste time. They showed him the footage of Samira leaving his room, the blood on her dress, and the inconsistencies in the story he had told. They pressed him, asking him over and over to tell them the truth. At first, Ishan tried to deny everything, but the weight of the evidence crushed him. His guilt and fear overwhelmed him. Finally, he broke down. He admitted to the affair with Samira and to the events that had led up to Devan's death. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he confessed, his voice shaking. "We were just... I don't know. It was a mistake." But when Devan found us, he was furious. "Samira, she hit him. She smashed the vase over his head." Ishan paused, his face contorted with regret. "We didn't know what to do. Samira, she told me we had to cover it up. We had to make it look like a robbery. I didn't want to be involved, but I couldn't back out." His confession sent shockwaves through the police station. Samira had not only orchestrated the attack but had also manipulated Ishan into helping her cover up the crime. The affair, the murder, the lies, it was all coming into focus. The detectives were eager to bring Samira in for questioning next, certain that they would be able to get the truth out of her. But when she walked into the interrogation room, they were taken aback by her calmness. There was no hint of panic in her eyes, no remorse, no tears. She was as composed as ever. She sat down across from the detectives, folding her hands neatly on the table. Her demeanor was icy, calculated. She didn't flinch, didn't show any sign of fear. It was as though she had prepared for this moment her whole life. "We know what happened, Samira," the lead detective said, placing the evidence in front of her. "We know about the affair with Ishan, the blood on your dress, the footage of you leaving his room. You can't deny it?" Samira's lips curled into a slight, almost imperceptible smile. "I'm not denying anything," she said coolly. "But you're missing the bigger picture." The detective stared at her, confused. "What do you mean?" Samira leaned forward slightly, her gaze steady and unwavering. "Devan wasn't the man you think he was. He was weak. He couldn't protect me, he couldn't give me what I needed. He was just a stepping stone, a means to an end. And now, I have everything I need." Her voice was cold and detached, as though she was speaking about a mere inconvenience, not a man whose life had been brutally taken. Her words sent a chill through the room. Samira wasn't just a woman scorned, she was a woman who saw people as pawns in her own game. The detectives exchanged looks. The case was clear now, but the twisted nature of Samira's betrayal sent a shudder down their spines. As the investigation progressed, the shocking details of the crime were laid bare for the world to see. The media coverage was relentless, with headlines across Mumbai and beyond reporting the tragic and disturbing events of that fateful night. Samira's calculated manipulation, her cold-hearted actions, and the affair that had led to her husband's murder were now public knowledge. Her family's wealth, her position in society, it all crumbled in an instant. The woman who had once been celebrated for her beauty, intelligence, and ambition was now seen for who she truly was, a ruthless, manipulative killer. Ishan, too, was arrested, his role in the cover-up and his own part in the affair making him complicit in the crime. His life, once filled with promise and success, was now destroyed. The police had uncovered the full extent of the betrayal. Devan's life had been snuffed out by the very people he trusted most, his wife and his best friend. And as the trial approached, the truth of their actions would be laid bare for the world to see, leaving nothing but the cold reality of what betrayal could truly lead to. As the trial began, it quickly became the talk of the town. The courtroom was packed with spectators, journalists, and curious onlookers, all eager to witness the outcome of a case that had shocked not just Mumbai, but the entire nation. The perfect wedding, the dream marriage, the betrayal, it was a story that seemed almost too unbelievable to be true. But as the evidence piled up, it became clear, Samira's role in Devan's death was irrefutable. The prosecution presented a meticulous case. The security footage, the forensic evidence, the confession from Ishan, everything pointed to Samira and Ishan's involvement in the brutal act. The image of Devan's body, lying lifeless in the honeymoon suite, was forever etched in the minds of the jurors. Samira's defense team tried to argue that she had been under duress, that her actions had been driven by fear and frustration. But the evidence painted a different picture. Samira had meticulously planned the murder, manipulating both Ishan and Devan in a cruel game for power. She had struck him with the vase, and then, together with Ishan, had staged the scene to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. The trial became a spectacle of greed and betrayal. Samira's charm, once her greatest asset, could no longer save her. The once mighty socialite was now reduced to a cold-blooded criminal in the eyes of the public. After days of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of guilty. Samira was sentenced to 25 years in prison for premeditated murder. Ishan, as an accessory to the crime, was sentenced to 10 years for his role in the conspiracy and cover-up. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as the judge pronounced the sentences, and for a moment, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. The case of Samira and Devan became a cautionary tale in Mumbai, a story that echoed through the halls of social circles, a reminder that even the most perfect of lives could be destroyed by greed, betrayal, and lust. The tale of the perfect bride and the groom who had everything would forever be etched in the city's memory, a reminder of how fragile love and trust truly were. As for Samira and Ishan, their fates were sealed. The once glamorous lives they had led had come to a tragic end. They would spend their days in prison, their dreams and desires shattered beyond repair. And as the years passed, the world would move on, but the memory of their crime, the horrific murder on what should have been the happiest day of Devan's life, would linger in the shadows, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind even the most perfect facades.